Okay, hey everybody, Nick with Honeit. Today we have Cammas Freeman from Stackrock Talent joining us. We're going to talk about the state of recruiting. We're going to talk about Cammas's background and how she got into recruitment, how she built her own firm, and we're going to talk about how she stands out and delights her clients and delights candidates with her services. So, welcome, Cammas. Tell us, how did you fall into recruitment? How did you get into the profession?
Thanks for having me, first of all. So probably like most recruiters, you actually fall into it because nobody really goes to college or goes into their career thinking, I'm going to be a recruiter. Maybe some people do, but not often. And so I actually was working for a tech startup, working on site at Hewlett Packard. So we were startup working on site on a contract, and I was the 20th employee. And at some point, they got a much bigger contract, which resulted in our need to not only grow the team in the US, but expand to Canada and Mexico. And of course, part of that is going to be doing a lot of recruiting. And what ended up happening was I just had kind of a knack for figuring out if people would be a good fit or not. And so they started having me do the final interview or kind of things. And pretty soon they're like, we actually just need you to do all the recruiting and the HR at that time. And so I was like, perfect. So I said, sure, I'll do anything. It was, my first job out of college. I'm happy to do whatever, but I was in actually an IT project manager role.
Okay.
So that was my role to begin with. And so we scaled that company to about 130 and expanded to Canada. And then I went to another startup right after that and basically did the same thing. I was the 21st employee at that second one. And we scaled up to about 160, which included some contractors. So that was my kind of deep dive. And then from there, I did a variety of other roles in operations, in marketing, and did some HR consulting, which ultimately led me to my last role, which was head of global talent strategy, which really included top of the funnel employer branding, recruitment marketing for a much bigger company where we were hiring close to 2,000 people a year, both high volume and tech. So that was kind of my well-rounded experience, which then led me to start Stackrock, which was a great kind of experience getting all those different components. And really starting Stackrock, I wanted to kind of take what I learned at this much bigger company and help smaller companies to be competitive in this market. This is when, if you think about after the 08-09 recession and tech recruiting, all this recruiting started getting really competitive again. And how do these smaller tech companies or smaller companies compete when these bigger companies have fully staffed teams with employer branding and recruitment marketing? And so that's really kind of my heart about going into this on my own.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you put out a lot of great content and it always looks good and you can tell there's like a professional level to it, right? Which I think is fantastic.
Good.
Do you have dedicated folks in house to help with the creatives and things like that when you're putting out information and helping or even helping clients with recruitment marketing materials and things like that?
Yeah. So I kind of primarily do the majority of the strategy around it. And then I do have one person in-house. And then we actually partner with a content team that is very specific to recruitment to kind of help us develop that so that we have a lot of content kind of going out and that it's really what's happening right now, what's, people care about both from the candidate perspective, but also from the company and hiring manager perspective. So we're kind of have two audiences that we're trying to provide really valuable information that, they can, take or view or maybe digest that could help them in some way.
Yeah, that's great. I see. Yeah, it's resources for candidates and job seekers to think about what to do now. It's a tricky time, and then obviously for companies big and small trying to figure out their messaging and their value prop.
Right.
Having worked at a couple of early stage startups and helping kind of scale, I mean, that's an exciting time. Um, what did you learn? What did you learn? And I assume your project management background helped in kind of organizing and structure and
Yeah.
processes. But how tell me a little bit about Stackrock and how you're working with your clients. Are you embedded recruiters? Do you help with contingent or executive search, or
Hmm.
does it
Hmm.
depend? Talk to a little bit about how you engage with your clients.
Yeah, so we do work with startups, but we also work with large organizations as
Okay.
well, clear to Fortune 500, although those are less. Kind of our sweet spot is the startups through to maybe 1,000 employees. That's kind of our area of expertise and where the majority of our work comes. And so it really depends on what's going on. We do both retained search, executive search, contractor. Embedded partner, as you mentioned. And then for our startups, we have kind of what we call startup source, which includes an HR component as well,
Okay.
because knowing, startups don't have a full HR team typically or those sources. So we know how critical it is to deliver like a phenomenal candidate experience clear to their onboarding and beyond, because these are super in demand candidates, right? Tech, all these niche areas. And we want them to be successful, both the candidate and these companies. And so we treat them like our best customer from start to finish. And we know the data around that. And it's really just the right thing to do. It's good business practice, but it really makes those startups look good. And for the long term, the benefits are referrals and people talking advocacy. That is only going to benefit them as they get their next round of funding. Now they have to hire their marketing and sales team to, really move forward. And so we're building that employer brand as we go and helping them do that.
That's great. Also, probably help make sure that that person you find in place is going to stick around, right? That onboarding
Right.
experience can make or break someone's, oh my gosh, this is a different place than I thought it was, right? The interview experience was this, but
Absolutely.
the onboarding experience is something different. So that's great. And then
Mhm.
you're right. I mean, with the small companies, especially tech companies, it's like, oh, we got to hire engineers to build the thing. And then it's like, oh, we got to hire salespeople to sell the thing. And it's like, oh, now we got to build out support to service the clients. And
Right.
it's a pretty fun journey. But
Yeah.
so I know you're in Boise, Idaho. I'm currently in
Mhm.
Spokane, Washington, so like Pacific Northwest. I think it's kind
Mhm.
of. Have you always worked out of Boise, or is that with Stackrock? Or and then I guess the follow-up would be: Do are your clients also in the area, or do you
Mhm.
support clients in other geographies?
I've always worked remotely to some level because even
Okay.
when I was at Hewlett Packard, right, HP is one of right there all over the country world. And so I've just been used to that type of global work environment and structure. At our last company, we were a global company. So we were hiring people all over the country. We also had an office in India, Philippines. So it was very much global. And then Stackrock were primarily in the US and Canada, but we also have a global partner. So we're able to, if companies have presence in Europe and also the US, or they're trying to expand to the US, things like that, we have that global resource to be able to
That's great.
service, wherever they are. So
Yeah, because when
yeah,
companies get to be a certain scale, then that does make sense.
yeah,
They need that local sales
yeah.
office
And a lot of times,
or support. Yeah.
right. And of course, we do have quite a few clients in Boise because we're here. A lot of times they may have a location here, but also location elsewhere across the US. So we can support those as well.
I mean, in terms of location, are you finding that, we talk about differentiating and startups trying to find their value prop and, where it may have used to be a big brand you wanted to work at because it was a big brand or maybe a mission driven company. Now, obviously, remote work and things like that are differentiators. Are you seeing companies open up offices in the Northwest and Boise to attract
Mhm.
folks that want to live in kind of a new place, maybe outside of a big city? What are you seeing there?
This really started in my second startup. So it must have been around maybe 2010, 11-ish, where um, a company that we actually contracted with, Acuity Group, I don't know if I'm supposed to say their name, but they saw the talent here in Boise, the tech talent, and they actually ended up opening a satellite office here and hiring a bunch of the people that were at the startup. And eventually they were acquired by Accenture. So they still, I believe, have that office here. But, that's been happening for a while. I just think it's been under the radar. As you know, Boise's kind of always been under the radar until more recently. And
Right.
then it's just
The word's out.
exploded.
The secret's
So
out.
we have a lot of tech founder, tech presence here, and maybe they came from the Bay Area, they came from somewhere else, and now they're integrated into our community, and there's a lot of startup activity going. So, earlier in my career, I was kind of part of the OG tech startup group, and now there's just, quite a bit more.
And Salt Lake City is really a hub now
Oh,
too.
yeah.
I mean, they tapped into something years back on, hey, we're going to do this our way, and skiing
Yeah.
and outdoors and stuff like that. Obviously, Seattle has a kind of a vibe for that too. Spokane, lakes and mountains, not, kind of quality of life. People are making those trade-offs in terms of jobs, and we'll see. I don't know if the kind of shift back to hybrid and on-site is going to affect that. A lot of people have moved over the last few years with more flexibility. Are you seeing your clients shift back to on-site and or hybrid roles versus remote? What are you seeing from that side?
Because we work both in tech and manufacturing are kind of our two biggest industry. Manufacturing has never really gone away from on-site. I mean, just
Fair
the
enough.
nature
Okay,
of the business, right? And so there hasn't been a lot of change there. And then on the tech side, I really are. I mean, it hasn't changed. I think what really happened is it opened those leaders' eyes to the available talent if they can expand beyond their local space. And it's really hard. I had to scale up a tech office in Dallas, Texas, but it was all local, and just to get 60 people in a 6 month time frame was not easy, right? I mean,
yeah.
But once you change that geography, your access to talent just goes way up. And I think that was a real eye opener. I personally have not seen a lot of tech companies looking to go back, at least that we work with.
Okay. Yeah. You had posted something interesting the other day about kind of the unemployment, side of things. And I think it's obviously correlated to the state of recruitment. We're seeing lots of, layoffs, and the technology sector or software or internet businesses, I guess you could say, have been highly impacted. But it sounds like manufacturing, other industries in the States are kind of going strong. You had posted that, we're at like 3.7%, which isn't as high as even the 50-year average of 5.78. And then, obviously there was the spike in 2020, which was scary, but it seems like things have kind of gotten back under control. And I saw another chart recently where, the state of California was like, crazily impacted, exponentially impacted more so than other states, right? Just due to the nature and the concentration of the internet company layoffs and things like that. So are you, in terms of your firm, are you in kind of business development mode, or do you have lots of recs to work on and you're focused on, finding candidates and placing candidates? Where you sit on that?
Yeah, to your point, I think, the tech has been so impacted and because there's so much more, I believe, visibility to what's happening in tech, particularly like on LinkedIn, where we're just seeing like all this crazy movement happening, that it does seem worse than it is. Is there an impact happening? Absolutely, particularly in tech. However, I don't want to be one of those people that's like false predictions, but word on the street and feeling is it's starting to come back a little bit already. So there's definitely that initial kind of flood of people that were on the market, but there's still hiring happening. And, kind of in our recruitment world, the prediction is Q4, it's really going to start picking up again. So that's the good news. Let's say don't quote me on that, but I guess you are right now.
Oh, kind of.
Um,
Well, not really.
but because we work in manufacturing, the demand there has still been the same because, I'm pretty sure part of it is just a lot of manufacturing coming back to the US. But some of the roles that we hire for in manufacturing, they're still so in demand. And it's mainly like those engineers and mechanical engineers and manufacturing engineers. Design. Those are still in demand roles. And so there's not been a lot of fall off. And in fact, our business has grown quite a bit in specifically manufacturing and a bit of construction as well. Part of that, interestingly, that we talk about is because there's the increasingly crossover between technology and those spaces, which traditionally were, more blue collar type stuff, but with the automation, the robotics, the IoT, just trying to figure out how to overcome the lack of labor and the software that's going into both of those spaces is, I think, part of what is keeping that activity going. They are digitally transforming, their operations, and so that is definitely keeping things going.
And are you, when you're working with your clients, are you partnering with them on like talent pipelines that could fit well with those, transferable skills and things like that, and even getting creative in terms of training? Or are they open to training with if people have like the, community college degree and like have a mechanical engineering associate's degree and some exposure to that in maybe one sector? Are they considering that transferable to your work?
Yeah, I think in general, because of the tight market in these certain roles, there's been an increasing openness to looking at alternative solutions. And I would say something that we do really well that I have always done is thinking outside the box and really understanding what makes a person good. If they are literally just missing some small skill or technology, those can be trained. It's really about the DNA of the person and their ability to quickly ramp up. And I would say my clients that have been more open to that, or trust me, if you will, on some of these things, it has 100% of the time gone really well. And I get comments like, I would have never hired that person because on paper, they did not look right. And this is literally the best hire I've ever had. Right. I mean, those are the things. And I think that is a big challenge for a lot of people, is being willing to think about things differently. And, why they're not always finding the people that they need for their team is because they get really stuck on this checklist of things that ultimately don't matter in the long run.
I love that. And, you had another article I saw that was kind of comparing recruitment to dating and just, those things that you just mentioned, those soft skills, those aspirations, those transferable skills, that's why the profession is so interesting. That's why the job of a recruiter is so interesting, because it's not just a job description and a resume. We're trying to understand what the hiring manager really wants, and many times that comes from the intake call, right? To figure out what's not on the resume or what's not on the job description, and then we're having all these conversations with people to figure out what they want to be doing, what's next, and that stuff isn't on the resume either. And so we spend a lot of time. We work with a lot of niche recruitment firms who do veteran transitions and things like that, right? Where a military job title does not match a civilian job title, and you have to help companies connect the dots, right?
Yeah.
And to get veterans to work, right? So it sounds very similar to what you're doing, where it's those human insights that we are then using to recommend or suggest. I guess easier said than done. Like, I don't know. What have you found? Like, how do you do that? Like, how do you?
Well, I'd love to tell you a story about our success with Honeit in this specific area. Can I?
Fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a perfect example of where we had a requirement from a client, and they were very adamant that they had a very specific experience in an area of technology, right? I knew that didn't really matter to the job. And so I went out and found the best person for the actual function that needed to happen. If I would have just sent a resume and even with a summary, the hiring manager would have said, they don't have cybersecurity. I don't want, they're not a fit. But I recorded the call and asked the important questions that I knew really mattered for this person to be successful. And that is who they hired. And that was the only person they interviewed. And the hiring manager literally said, like, that is what convinced him, because once he heard her talk and he was like, that's what I need. And of course, I'm like, I know that. But that was what pushed us over the edge. And that is what it takes. Sometimes I'm like, don't look at the resume. Just listen to what, I'm telling you and read what's here. So anyway, that's just an example, but
fantastic.
so thank you.
We love hearing those stories. I mean, because you're right. It's again, there's a reason you just don't match resumes and job descriptions. It's just so much more than that. And that's where a lot of technology companies that come into our space and they try to do matchmaker and things like that, but it just kind of, we've seen that time and time again. It's more than that. And so, yeah, I think going back to those human conversations and keeping this profession human, I think that's the right way to do it. And especially where, even with software engineering, like programming languages are always changing. Like, right? Like every couple of years, there's a new programming language that's the thing. And, if you're just playing keyword bingo, you're missing the person who has the skills or the ambition or the capabilities to learn new things and to, what's next, figure out what's next and help you solve the problem that hasn't already been solved. So yeah, I think that's fascinating. What do you see, in terms of our world in recruitment? I mean, there's automation is a buzz, AI is obviously a buzz. How does that conflict or support this idea of human conversations? I think that's where we spend a lot of time in trying to figure out, maybe communicating the value of Honeit, because it seems counterintuitive to automation and AI and all this stuff that's buzzing around us. What are your thoughts on how AI fits with what we do, or how automation can help make recruiters more productive, but maybe not, but keep the human in HR?
Right. I think it's been a winning last few years in terms of HR recruiting tech. And the type of solutions that are coming out are just phenomenal. And really, it's not replacing the human part of it. It's replacing the repetitive administrative tasks that take us away from the human element. And I invested a lot in technology last year, including Honeit, which has been by far like our best investment because of our ability to not only streamline our process, but it saves our hiring managers time too. And that's been like a huge positive feedback that we're getting, is they can have an insight into someone in 5 or 10 minutes and without having to schedule an interview in case it's not a fit. We're not wasting their time, and they have the ability to do that. So that's an example of where we're saving the time for the human part of it. And so we can do that really, really well instead of not doing it well. Like you talk, a lot of recruiters, there's a lot of negativity around ghosting, for example, right? Recruiters ghosting candidates. Well, I can tell you, after working in corporate HR and corporate recruiting, the majority of that is lack of technology and lack of resources. They just do not have the bandwidth or the systems in place to effectively manage that a lot of the time. Now, do people do it just because they're jerks? Of course. But I know it was like you know, horrible to try and manage that because we didn't get the investment or the resources. And so this is helping companies, helping recruiting agencies to be able to do that better than we have before, because we just didn't have the resources or the availability. If we had people doing that all the time, there'd be no profit. It wouldn't be cost effective.
Right.
And so, yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times the recruiter, and whether it's an external recruiter or it's even an internal talent acquisition partner, like there's a lot of waiting for feedback from the hiring manager, right? And I feel like part of the delay historically has been, what are we actually sharing or presenting with them? Like if we're really just doing a phone screen and forwarding a resume and saying, hey, do you want to talk to this person? Right? That hiring manager has to decide, gosh, based on this resume, like, do I want to invest 45 minutes of my day? And I don't know. And that's where it's like, we got this gray area, and then 3-4 days go by, and then it's next Thursday, and they're like, yeah, okay, maybe next week. And that's where it takes literally like 2 weeks between the recruiter phone screen and the hiring manager call, because you spoke with the candidate, you heard all these amazing things, but now the hiring manager just has the resume and your notes, right? Which isn't really enough to move the needle. And
it's not enough.
So I think part of that ghosting is really not like that it's just like we don't know. There's no update quite yet because we're waiting on someone. And so I love that your point of like, if we can accelerate that feedback loop from the hiring manager, we think that ghosting, and that we can have more actionable feedback sooner to the candidate, right?
Well, and it's about asking better questions too. So specific to Honeit, we say, look, what are the 3 or 4 things you absolutely need to know if you want to talk to them, just to talk to them. And we're giving them that right off the bat. And then it's yes or no. And I will say, using Honeit, I should probably keep some data on this. My guess is 95% of the people we submit go through based on listening to their feedback. It's not a lot. It's a very small amount.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you're saying because you're asking incredible questions on your screening calls and you're sharing those insights, 95% of people
talk
to the hiring manager. I mean, wow.
Yep. And even the person that I mentioned that we were able to get in a role that didn't, meet all the requirements, like she reached out afterwards and said, I have never worked with a recruiter, but I know I would have never gotten an opportunity to interview for that job based on not having that thing that didn't really matter.
I love it. I mean, and then that's so great for high potential candidates, right? We know it when we hear it. I think that's what makes a good recruiter, is like, we know it when we hear it. Oh my gosh, you figured out how to do this thing and you solved this big problem and you saved the company a ton of money, and that's not indicated on the resume. And or wow, you paid your way through college working 2 jobs and, self-funded yourself and taught yourself to code or did all this incredible stuff. And we're like, wow, this is someone that I would hire in a heartbeat and could learn whatever. And that's always been hard to then communicate on a submittal or a write-up or just simply interview notes, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and also really great candidates, the majority of them are also very humble. Humble people make amazing employees. Well, the downside is they are not going to talk about themselves or tell you things unless you dig it out of them. And if they're just submitting a resume that said, oh, I was operations, whatever. And I said, how much money did you save your company? And, oh, the first year, $90,000. I was like, this is not on your resume. I mean, she's like, oh, I was just doing my job, And it's like, no, that's significant. And, hearing them answer in a way that is saying that, and also very humbly, is appealing, to people. So
everybody, I mean, you want to work with smart, confident contributors that are also easy to work with, a good person, and humble. Like, I think that's a great quality. That's a really great insight, Cammas. Like, You hear a lot of times like women don't apply for jobs that they don't check all the bullet points, and we know that job descriptions are just cut and paste and reused anyway. So but I wonder if there might be some parallels there, right? Around as a recruiter, it's our job to on the call to kind of uncover some of that stuff. And again, what's not on the resume,
Absolutely.
and then being able to effectively communicate that to stakeholders. I think that's very insightful, and it's like that's why these human conversations are so important, because you're right. Maybe a humble person's bullet points is going to look different than someone who's less humble or braggadocious. Who knows? I think that's a
Right.
great insight. So I mean, we talk a lot. I guess in terms of differentiation, I think that's another thing that we talk to a lot of recruiting firms about. It's like you know how do you stand out to your clients, like when you're in business development mode and you're like, hey, I'm Cammas, Boise, this is how we deliver more value to you, right? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? And then similarly, when you're reaching out to candidates, how are we
Mhm.
providing value to them, and kind of standing out from other recruiters who may be working on similar roles or similar recs with similar clients? We'd love to get your thought. I mean, I know the content and the quality of the content you put out is great, and the branding stuff, but maybe you could talk a little bit more about techniques or best practices
Mhm.
to kind of to present yourself, to clients and candidates.
Sure. Um, I think, on the business development side, I mean, we get a lot of referrals, and
Okay.
I would say maybe 40% of our referrals actually come from candidates we've worked with, which, is very telling. I think what I know we do well, and what we also get feedback on that we do well, is we really do the work to understand the culture, who they're looking for, who's going to be successful in this role. And, that investment, although it may be hard for the hiring team to carve out that time, it really makes everything more successful. And I think just maybe my background, maybe asking questions, I'm naturally like, I know how to dig stuff out. And is I can really get to the root of who it is they're looking for beyond that job description. And then also advise them. I mean, sometimes I'll get some feedback. I'm a pretty direct person, and but it's also very appreciative, because I'm like, I know you're looking for this person. There might be 200 people that exist that have all these things. We need to re-strategize on this. Like, what are the most important things? So there's can be a coaching or advising element, because again, I want them to be successful. If they're successful, we're successful. And so we're going kind of beyond that. And of course, I have a background in HR and leading big teams. And so even from an advisory perspective, I mean, we do a lot of extra things. We've made employer brand and onboarding videos for our clients,
Hmm.
anything that's going to help set them apart and make them stand out and showcase that employee value proposition. I think, again, that marketing branding background, I love that stuff. So we do that. But on the candidate side, our candidate experience is like very, very good. Our team, that is something, we have the values. Everyone we have working for us have those same values. We have the no ghosting rule. Now, are we human? Yes. Do we make mistakes? Yes. But it is rarely that we would ever just not get back to someone or
Yeah.
something like that. And we give people
Even an
feedback,
update of
which,
like we haven't heard back is a good update.
yes.
Let's appreciate that. Like,
And
I'm still waiting, So yeah.
yeah, and we do a good job of preparing them for those interviews to be successful.
Hmm.
Here's what you need to know. Like, here's, some things I would highlight based on your strengths that, they're going to care about. And so I think we spend the extra time. What I hear is you guys you don't throw resumes over the fence. We do not do that. It's a very partnership and collaborative effort, and we want everybody to have a good experience, because ultimately we all win. And that's what I love, is that's why I do this. I'm like, I don't know, it's like a puzzle, right?
It is.
Okay, all three parts win. Like that's the goal.
I love that. It's funny. Terms of like, oh, only 200 people in the United States have this thing. We probably should Andres Traslafina is a great customer and a friend, and works at Whole Foods in executive recruitment. And we were at an event in Phoenix, and he said, "Kill the purple squirrel," right? Like, which is interesting. And because it was like such a good spin on everybody's like, "Oh, I find purple squirrels." It's like, no, no, no. Like, the job of the intake call is to actually reset the hiring manager's expectations. If they're looking for a purple squirrel, you need to say, oh, well, that's going to be 3x your budget, or right, or do we want to reassess or pull a few of these requirements off? And so this idea of like killing the notion of the purple squirrel, I thought was a fun way to say
amen
that.
to that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
and then it makes our jobs easier, because we're not, we're going to have more people to reach out to, and maybe more strategies around the right profile.
Well, and kind of back to what you said about the job descriptions and women not applying. I mean, the stats are 60%. Men will apply if they meet 60%. Women will apply if they meet 100. Like, so I always say the more requirements you have on there, one, the less people in your pool, and definitely the less diverse that you're going to get. And so those are the facts, and the reality of it.
I mean, I'm just thinking about any job, like, how many bullet points are there really? And I think what's also funny is, if someone's actually qualified for the job, like, they know what the job is, right? And so there's just this kind of funny irony of like what the job description actually is, and like, should it be more about the company and the value versus like the things or what you've done previously? I don't know. I just see so many cut and paste job descriptions, because they're hard to write, right? It's work, it's effort. Hiring managers don't want to do it. Recruiters may or may not want to do it, and so we go search, we copy one, we change 2 bullet points, and we say, hey, what do you think of this? And we're like, sure. It's like,
and now we have ChatGPT, honestly, to help get some of that in place, and be able to dial it in, which is great. But also, like, again, kind of back to that intake part, I said, let's forget about the job description for a minute. I just want to ask you these questions. Like, don't think about that. Let's just go through this. And ultimately, what comes out of that is often different. Oh, yeah, they don't actually need this thing. I'm like, okay, well, that was like the number 2 bullet on, this requirements. Like,
glad
we can
address
that. It's fine. Yeah. So
are you, when you ask hiring managers those great questions, are you capturing any of those highlights to share with candidates? I didn't know if you're creating any job previews or anything like that yet.
Yeah. So I think there's still some hesitancy for people to want to be recorded on those. And so, we capture it in our notes, and we leverage that information to kind of create our pitch or the value proposition, if you will.
Or even internally using it for alignment,
right?
Whoever's going to be working on the role. And
Yeah.
things like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So from a sourcing perspective, it's definitely helpful. I think, I just think there's still some hesitancy about being recorded saying things, and people want to feel like maybe they can be vulnerable or transparent, that maybe they wouldn't want recorded, and I'm fine with that. So
yeah, we're seeing
I get it.
A little different applications. Some of the internal TA teams are feeling a bit more comfortable with that, because they can actually kind of bring the job to life and showcase A players to attract A players, or showcase diverse hiring managers to attract diverse candidates and things like that, and be a little more transparent with, this is the job, but this is the person you'd be working with, and like using that to get the right folks in the funnel.
We have done that when we do what we call job marketing. And so we actually create videos, edit them, and we use that in our outreach, which we have seen our response go. But there's certain clients that are willing to do that when we have exclusivity with them. We kind of need to have that, right? But I have found it very successful. Like I measured, we were going after like an embedded systems engineer, pretty hard role. And prior to us doing the video and our outreach, we had about an 18% response rate. It went up to 40 with the video. And so I share this with people. I'm like, look, this is something we can do that, is going to benefit you, because these people are getting hit up night and day, hundreds of people. And how are we going to stand out? And that's great if I can talk to them, but ultimately they care about who are they working with? What does this person think about technology? Like, what's their philosophy? Like, and it's pretty
it's
powerful.
Interesting. We have a lot of talk about putting salaries on job descriptions, and many states are like making that more of a law, but it's like, I feel like that's really only scratching the surface. It's like companies are still like hiding the hiring manager to 3 steps down the process. And it's like the candidate has 2 conversations, all this time is spent, and then you meet the hiring manager, like, I couldn't work with that person, or we're not even compatible, or whatever. So I feel like there's also a lot of inefficiencies in our world. Just some of that stuff we're not showcasing maybe as early as we could, or I think there's opportunities there. But well, Cammas, we've talked about so much today. I appreciate you joining us. Thank you for sharing best practices and telling us a little bit more about your world and in Boise. I think I love talking to companies in the Pacific Northwest and folks that are not working outside of maybe big cities and still being, great contributors and pushing the profession forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. These are all my favorite nerd out topics, so I'll talk about it any day, all day.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cammas. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Okay, thank you.
Alrighty.